Hello and welcome to the 14th community meeting for StackRox, the open source project. I'm Mike Foster. I'm joined by my co-chair, Matthias Medinger, and we're, fresh off the 4.0 release, obviously really excited for the product, the cloud service launch coming from Red Hat Summit and getting people hands-on with StackRox and ACS was a ton of fun. But we have more news. We have 4.1 release coming up. I know that the last meeting, I promised that a StackRox roadmap update is coming. We're going to be recording that next week, so stay tuned. I will post it in the chat for you. That being said, any 4.0 issues, we'd love to hear from you in Slack, just so that we can adjust. Open up issues, open up RFEs. What do you want to see? And that leads us into the 4.1 release. So 4.0 obviously was huge. We're happy to hear success stories from migrations, especially operator and Helm charts. Things are going very smoothly. I've a lot of praise to the engineering team that I've heard from external users, and just wanted to talk about what's coming in 4.1, highlight some of the changes. In the notes, you'll see that there's a change log that I've put up there. The projected date is the end of July. Obviously, we'll know more, but the code freeze has happened, right, Matthias? I hope I didn't jump right into that, but maybe you can walk us through 4.1 timing and what people are going to see.
So in general, what might be interesting is we have a changelog markdown file in the StackRox repository, which is always up to date. So if you folks are actually interested in bleeding edge news, what's happening or what's deprecated, feel free to stop by and take a look in the repository. It's all open source and there to see. You might be missing the information from our bug tracker because that is not public as far as I'm aware of. But we try to actually make the entries self-sufficient without the bug tracker access. Besides that, we have entered the code freeze for 4.1, which means code freeze was, I think, last Wednesday. So projected date end of July, and as far as I'm aware of, no major road bumps hit just yet. But obviously, we're kind of early in the release cutting process, so let's say fingers crossed everything works out. Regarding 4.0, I was actually pleasantly, on the one hand, I was pleasantly surprised that things worked out as they did, because it was still a big change with the database migration. But on the other hand, it's not a huge surprise, because I would argue that 4.0 was one of our most intensely tested releases I've ever seen. So obviously, we take a lot of care and pride in actually making sure that our upgrades work, but especially when you have such a big migration, you want to make extra double sure that everything works as intended. And as it looks like actually engineering did quite the job this time, and I'm super happy to see that. Not to toot my own horn maybe, but anyways, let's talk a little bit about highlights. So 4.0 was the very big one, obviously, but we also shipped some new features in 4.1. Some of the highlights are the vulnerability management workflow is actually updated. So we are deprecating, or we are replacing some of the parts, and you will see improvements coming or rolling out in the next upgrades. So this is a multi-step process. So we'll look forward to actual improvements to that. In general, RoxStar you might know as the CLI tool to interact with our platform. And what we did is actually, you used to require an admin or API token to actually interact with it. Now we actually switched that over to user tokens. So it's a little bit more easily accessible now. And also user tokens are a little better in terms of scope, let's put it that way. Also, we introduced quite some time ago the feature of having signature checking for images that we scan. And we have introduced an environmental variable to actually turn off signature fetching if you're not using that feature, to actually minimize the amount of API calls that that our product does against Artifactory and the likes to actually fetch these. And finally, as maybe the more important or most important thing to remember is, as we deprecated some time ago multiple access scopes and security contexts, or SCCs. And please be aware that these will be removed in the future. So make sure that if your deployments or anything in your environment use permission sets define or our out-of-the-box permission sets, or the custom security constraints of collector, admission control, or sensor, if you use any of these, they will be removed. So this might break your environments if you don't migrate away from these. So please keep that in mind. And with that, actually, that rounds up the biggest highlights. But if I remember correctly, we also will have a little bit of an easily accessible summary of the biggest changes and what's new, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm working on a blog just to capture this all, along with a what's new video for those who like audio video content instead of reading a lengthy blog. I do want to highlight two of the major changes. The network graph, the 2.0 one is now the in the release. Network graph 1.0 is deprecated, and now it's going to be network graph 2.0. So that same process is now happening with the vulnerability management workflow. I could see it. It's very nice and sleek. I really like the workflow now, especially with the fact that we have host scanning and container scanning, and obviously, compliance and looking at Kubernetes environment as well, getting all of that vulnerability management info in one dashboard. It can be very overwhelming, but we've managed to make it very sleek and useful for people. So definitely worthwhile checking out. You'll see once you get in the dashboard that there is vulnerability management 1.0 and 2.0. So go through it, let us know your thoughts, help us, make 2.0 even better than the first one. So looking forward to that. And then I think we just had two questions that were in the Slack channel we wanted to address. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matthias.
As far as I'm aware of, yes. So we have, the one is, Dane was asking, I'm trying to sort through how to get certain policies that are runtime policies to auto clause out. So the problem with that is, assuming that Dane is talking about violations that are triggered by policies, violations don't vanish by themselves unless you disable the policy that triggered them. So that is actually a thing that we don't want, as far as I'm aware of, because imagine someone spinning up a rogue container or a rogue deployment and running some code in it, however that worked. But if we assume they did that, it would raise a violation, obviously. For example, I don't know, someone invoked a package manager and that raised a violation. If you now delete this container and the violation would go away, there would be no audit trail for us to actually show you that something happened in your cluster. So we don't actually auto-close policies or violations. The only moment that actually violations vanish is, or get closed, is if you disable or delete the policy. If you do that, these vanish, but everything else you don't, as far as I'm aware of. Correct me if I'm wrong, actually. I'm not aware of any violations that get auto-closed.
That's good. I think this question could go two ways. One is the violations aspect, and one is a timer on a policy to be not enforced / not notified. I think in general, that is security, not best practice, right? To have something that's autoed, it needs to be audited, who set the timer, when it closes out, because if all of a sudden we're not enforcing or informing on a policy and something happens that is not good. However, I would say, I mean, you could do something in the CLI where you're making a policy change through the API. Again, that being said, it's a little bit of overkill. So I'd like to hear the use case for automatically turning off a policy or a violation based on time, right? Maybe, you have 30 days to make a certain change, to put it in place, you stop it, but then, the use case for turning it off / removing it, I'm hard pressed to see the advantage over the disadvantage on that one.
I mean, the only thing is, I get that this can lead to, maybe a lot of noise, a lot of violations, depending on the configuration. And there might be an opportunity for us to actually review our out-of-the-box rule set. But that is actually also something, as it is our out-of-the-box rule set, that means changes apply to each and every customer. So we better, if I raise that with the rest of engineering, I better have a very good example explaining or showing off the benefit of actually changing something. So Dane, if you have a good example of why what happens there, or could give us a little bit more information about the use case, that would be awesome.
Yes, and then the last one, Nicholas Richard. I know we talked about mounting to Docker sock in the last 2 releases. There hasn't been any change, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. One is backwards compatibility, I believe. Do you want to just run through the logic on that one?
So in general, the Docker sock mounting is, for anyone not aware, some time ago, Kubernetes deprecated the Docker shim. So docker.sock is something that Kubernetes used to have, and that we used to use to actually run compliance checks against Docker. Nowadays, most of the Kubernetes deployments out there don't run on Docker anymore. But the Docker sock is completely gone. But we actually still need to be somewhat backwards compatible. So we still actually support the Docker sock, which also means our deployments try to mount it. If the Docker sock is not available, we completely ignore it. So there is no functional impediment to our product if it's not there. There is no warning. The accompanying code is just being skipped. So from that perspective, there is no problem of leaving it in there. Well, but that also means we're still mounting it, which means if you have auditing tools that actually check for that, it will continue to raise alerts. And the big question now is, from a technical point of view, there is multiple ways we could address this. Obviously, we could update our deployment templates to only conditionally deploy with this mount. But the question is, should we do that, and when should we do that? The other option would be to do that in code, and basically, because we are as ACS or StackRox is a native Kubernetes security platform, we have full access and full knowledge about the Kubernetes deployment that you're running, which means we could just add a version switch. But if we add that version switch in our code, in our platform code, we would always still try to mount it. So that wouldn't help. And updating our Helm templates, or in general our deployment options to conditionally mount this, would most likely be the correct way of doing it. But as we are not breaking any functionality, the change has not been prioritized very high. That's sad, because honestly, against our product management, it is kind of a hard sell to say, well, let's invest engineering time to actually fix this, because there is a lot of features and bug fixes that are very interesting and important for the product itself. And this one is one that is annoying, but functionally not impacting the product. The big question now is, that is me speaking as a single developer and not for all of ACS. So Nicholas, if you have a compelling example of where this actually impacts or raises a problem in using our platform, please do let me know, because you're actually giving me the tools to correctly argument against the rest of engineering and PM. So that would actually be awesome, because yes, it might be annoying for you folks, but honestly, from my point of view, I see this keeps getting raised, so I want to actually also kind of have it fixed for you folks, especially. So I need to have I need the tools and the arguments at hand to actually argument why we should do it.
Mhm. Yeah, you heard it here. The more you raise issues and RFEs, the more things get taken seriously. And I think that's probably the biggest ask for the 4.1 release I have for the open source community, is try out that vulnerability management workflow. Let us know what you like, what you don't like. Raise issues so that we can fix them in a 4.2 release or in a patch release. But that feedback is obviously extremely important. And that's why we love having you in the channel. So again, we'll be back. I want to wrap it up. We'll be back next month, the second Tuesday of the month in July. I'll update the calendar in the Slack channel. As always, the notes are in the channel, the Zoom links in the channel, and please just share your thoughts with us and open as many issues as you can. Any final words, Matthias?
As usual, even if it's not an issue for you, but you just feel there is weird UX, or you have the feeling that docs aren't right, feel free to contact us, reach out over GitHub issues or the Slack channel, whatever is most fitting for you. We're always there. We're always reading, always trying to answer as much or to address as much as we can. And I guess with that, folks, it's been a pleasure, and see you next month.
Take care.